Do you remember a time when a penny actually meant something? Not just in value but in memory? Today, we're diving into three humble copper coins from Canada. The 1970, 1976, and 1977 1-cent pieces. They might have jingled in your pocket back in the day, slipped into a candy machine, or been tossed into a jar by the phone. But these aren't just coins anymore, they're miniature time machines. They hold the story of a country, generation, and maybe even your own childhood. Whether you grew up with these in your change, or are just now discovering their beauty, get ready, because these little coins carry big history, where every coin tells a story, and every story brings us closer to history. Today, we're diving into the rich legacy of the 1-cent Canada coin from 1976, a piece that might look small in size, but holds a monumental place in Canadian numismatic history and for collectors around the world, especially for those who cherish copper coinage and historical details. The 1976 Canadian 1-cent coin is more than just pocket change. It is a representation of a national identity, an economy in transition, and a culture that deeply values its heritage. Now, to understand the significance of this particular coin, we need to go back to the origins of the Canadian cent and the political and economic environment of the 1970s. Canada, in 1976, was a nation in the midst of change, both economically and culturally. It was a time when Canada was asserting its identity on the world stage, and coins, like the 1-cent, were circulating in the hands of millions, representing the daily life of ordinary Canadians. The 1976 coin features the iconic image of Queen Elizabeth II. On the obverse side, this portrait was designed by Arnold Machin, a British sculptor whose depiction of the young queen wearing a tiara became a standard for Commonwealth coinage during this era. Her profile is facing right and includes the inscription, Elizabeth II, DG Regina, which stands for Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen. The obverse design remained unchanged for many years, symbolizing continuity and stability in the Canadian monarchy. The reverse side of the coin is equally important. It showcases the famous maple leaf twig design, which was first introduced in 1937 by Canadian artist G. E. Kruger Gray. The simple yet powerful design became one of the most recognized symbols of Canadian coinage and a visual representation of Canadian pride. The 1976 penny retained the original reverse, which includes two maple leaves on a single twig, accompanied by the word Canada and the denomination 1 cent, as well as the date 1976. Now, what makes the 1976 Canadian cent special to collectors is not just its age or design, but also its composition. During this period, the coin was still being struck in bronze, an alloy composed of 98% copper, 0.5% tin, and 1.5% zinc. This made the coin heavier and more substantial compared to later versions that transition to a copper-plated zinc base. The weight of the 1976 penny is approximately 3.24 grams, and it has a diameter of 19.05 millimeters, which makes it one of the last in its line to carry that traditional heavy copper feel. For people who grew up using these coins, the sound and weight of a 1976 penny can instantly trigger memories of vending machines, payphones, or candy purchased with just a few cents minted at the Royal Canadian Mint, which is headquartered in Ottawa. The 1976 penny had a relatively high mintage of over 642 million coins, but despite the large quantity circulated, finding high-grade examples, especially in mint state condition, is becoming increasingly rare. Mint state condition is becoming increasingly rare. The Royal Canadian Mint ensured the quality of production at the time, but the daily use and constant circulation means most 1976 pennies today are found in circulated condition, with signs of wear and tear. As a result, collectors place higher value on uncirculated specimens, particularly those graded Ms. 65 and above by major grading companies like PCGs or NGC. These high-grade coins display full luster, clean fields, and sharp strikes which are not easy to find due to the softness of copper, which is prone to scratching and discoloration over time. Numismatically, the 1976 Canadian penny represents a turning point not just in design, but also in material, economy, and public usage. As inflation began to rise in the late 70s, the cost of producing copper coins started to exceed their face value, leading mints around the world, including Canada, to consider alternative cheaper metals. Though the transition wouldn't happen immediately, the 1976 coin marks the end of an era where copper coins were both common and cost-effective. In terms of its place in the market today, the 1976 Canadian 1-cent coin can be worth anywhere from face value up to several dollars, depending on condition, mint errors, and grading. Rare varieties such as double die errors, off-center strikes, or planchet flaws are particularly sought after by collectors and can command higher prices, especially when certified by trusted grading services. For collectors who focus on date runs or typesets, the 1976 penny is a key year due to the transitionary phase it represents. It sits perfectly in a collection as a benchmark of late 20th century Canadian currency for educators. The coin is a useful tool to discuss Canadian political history, coinage, design, economics, and metallurgy for older collectors. It is a reminder of the Canada of their youth, a country evolving rapidly and using these very coins as part of everyday life. Beyond numismatics, the coin holds cultural value because coins like the 1976 penny played an essential role in daily routines of Canadians across the country, from school children saving up for hockey cards to seniors using them in corner stores. The penny was more than just money, it was part of Canadian life. And when Canada decided to phase out the penny in 2012, the 1976 version suddenly became a relic of a different time, sparking renewed interest in copper coinage for investors who seek bulk copper or are preparing for future numismatic value. The 1976 Between the two nations, many 1976 Canadian cents made their way into circulation across northern states, making them a familiar sight to Americans as well in pop culture. The Canadian penny has occasionally been featured in television commercials, educational books, and coin collecting documentaries, symbolizing both the smallness of the denomination and the greatness of its impact in people's lives. So what can we learn from the 1976 Canadian 1-cent coin? That a small object with a tiny face value can carry decades of history, symbolism, and national pride. That even in an age of digital wallets and cryptocurrencies, there's still a place in our hearts and collections for something real, something tangible, something that connects us to our past. The next time you come across a 1976 Canadian penny, don't just look at the date or the scratches. Take a moment to remember its journey from the mint to your hands, from cash registers to coin jars, and now into the spotlight as a piece of living history. So whether you are a new collector or a seasoned numismatist, the 1976 Canadian 1-cent coin is a must-have, a conversation starter, historical artifact, and a quiet reminder that sometimes the smallest pieces leave the biggest impact. Coin tells a story, and today we journey north to Canada to explore the full and fascinating history of the 1977 Canada 1-cent coin, a small piece of copper that carries big historical weight and a connection to both everyday Canadians and global collectors. The 1977 Canadian 1-cent coin is a powerful symbol of national identity, colonial legacy, economic transition, and the changing role of coins in modern economies. Minted by the Royal Canadian Mint, this coin represents a turning point in Canadian numismatics, where function, tradition, and design meet in a single piece of metal. The coin itself is composed of 98% copper with traces of tin and zinc, giving it a strong reddish hue and a distinctive tone when dropped or flipped across a hard surface. The diameter is 19.05 millimeters, the weight is 3.24 grams, and it has a smooth, plain edge that gives it that familiar pocket-worn feel. Now, let's talk about the obverse. The obverse side of the coin features the right-facing bust of Queen Elizabeth II, who was in the 25th year of her reign. At the time, the effigy was designed by Arnold Machin, a British sculptor, whose portrait of the Queen became standard on many Commonwealth coins. This design was first used on Canadian coinage in 1965 and continued well into the 1980s. It presents the Queen with a youthful appearance, wearing a tiara and an air of calm confidence. The inscription reads, Elizabeth to DG Regina, which stands for Elizabeth to de Gratia Regina, meaning Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen. Now flip the coin and look at the reverse. Here is where Canadian culture shines. The reverse design features the iconic maple leaf twig designed by G.E. Kruger Gray, a British artist who never actually visited Canada, but whose work has become deeply embedded in Canadian coin history. The maple leaf is a long-standing symbol of Canada, dating back to the 18th century, and was officially incorporated into Canadian identity when it was adopted for the national flag in 1965. The image on the coin shows two conjoined maple leaves on a single stem, design that had been in use on the penny since 1937. Surrounding the image are the words, 1 cent Canada, and the year 1977. But the story of this coin goes beyond its design and metal. It reflects a time in Canadian history when inflation was rising, manufacturing was shifting, and coins were still a crucial part of everyday life. 1977 was part of a decade marked by cultural evolution, the rise of Canadian nationalism, and new waves of immigration and social change. Coins like this one were exchanged in small corner stores, gas stations, bus fare boxes, and vending machines. They passed through millions of hands, carrying with them not just monetary value, but shared experiences, memories, and identity. In terms of mintage, the Royal Canadian Mint produced more than 871 million of these coins in 1977, making it one of the most widely circulated denominations of the year. However, globalization at the same time, Canadians were enjoying hockey nights with players like Guy Lafleur and Bobby, or the birth of national icons like Terry Fox was just around the corner, and Canadian cinema and music were beginning to gain international recognition. All of this was unfolding in a country where a simple penny still held the power to buy a piece of candy or to save towards something greater. The Canadian penny has always held a place of affection in the hearts of Canadians, but its journey would eventually come to an end in 2012, when the Canadian government discontinued the 1 cent coin, citing production costs and reduced use in commerce. However, back in 1977, it was still a fundamental part of daily exchange and financial literacy. Children learned to count with them, elders saved them in jars, and banks rolled them by the millions. The 1977 1 cent coin thus lives as a memory of simpler times, a reminder of how the smallest denomination can hold the greatest meaning. In the collector world, the 1977 Canadian penny remains a key piece for those building full sets by year, for those interested in era coins, or those who simply value the nostalgic connection to a time before digital money. It is not particularly rare in circulated condition, but a well-preserved example, especially with the red luster, and graded by services like PCGs or NGC, can fetch modest premiums at auction or from dealers. This coin also has educational value. It teaches us about metallurgy, die engraving, minting processes, and circulation ware. It invites us to think about how coins reflect society, politics, and national symbols. It is a gateway for young numismatists and a treasure for older collectors who remember using it regularly in the 70 seconds and 80 seconds. And now, as we reach the end of this deep dive, we must remember the importance of such coins in telling the story of a country. The 1977 1 cent Canadian coin may be small in size, but it is immense in historical weight and cultural connection. From the Queen to the maple leaves, from the artist's design to the millions of hands that held it, this coin represents a Canada both proud and evolving. lived in tradition, and looking toward the future. So whether you are a lifelong collector, a casual enthusiast, or just someone who once had a penny jar in your kitchen drawer, take a moment to appreciate the legacy of the 1977 Canadian penny,
Really.
because in the world of
Yeah, yeah.
coins, sometimes the
Okay,
smallest pieces hold the biggest stories, where history lives in your hands, and every coin tells a deeper story than most people realize. Today, we're diving into the fascinating world of Canadian currency to explore a humble yet historically rich piece of copper that circulated through generations. The 1970 Canadian 1 cent coin may seem like small change, but its legacy runs deep in Canada's national identity. Its design, evolution, minting details, material composition, and social context all speak volumes about the country's past economic shifts and cultural pride. Let's take a step back to understand the period this coin emerged from. The year was 1970. Canada was in the midst of a changing world. The post-war economic boom was settling. The global coinage industry was evolving rapidly, and modern minting technologies were improving. Meanwhile, in Canada, Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau had just won re-election, and the country was navigating political reforms as well as cultural transformation. The coinage reflected these changes quietly yet permanently. Now, let's talk about the coin itself. The 1970 Canadian 1 cent coin was minted by the Royal Canadian Mint, which has been producing currency for the nation since 1908. This penny was part of the long-running small cent series, which started in 1920, replacing the larger cent coins that circulated in the earlier part of the century. The 1970 version continued the traditional copper-based composition, weighing 3.24 grams with a diameter of 19.05 millimeters, made of 98% copper, 0.5% tin, and 1.5% zinc. This was among the last of the truly copper-rich Canadian pennies before gradual material changes began in later years. On the obverse of the coin, you'll find the familiar portrait of Queen Elizabeth II. The version used on this coin is the one sculpted by Arnold Machen, a British artist known for his refined and youthful depiction of the monarch. This portrait debuted in 1965 and continued until 1989. The Queen is facing right, wearing a tiara and surrounded by the Latin inscription Elizabeth II DG Regina, which means Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen. On the reverse side, the 1970 penny features Canada's iconic maple leaf twig designed by George Kruger Gray, a respected British coin artist. The maple leaf design dates back to 1937 and was chosen to symbolize Canadian heritage, unity, and pride. The two maple leaves on a single twig reflect the strength and resilience of the nation. Under the maple leaves, you'll see the denomination 1 cent, and just beneath that, the word Canada and the date 1970. Now, this coin wasn't just a piece of currency, it represented a time when Canadians were developing a strong sense of national identity, separate from British colonial influence. The bilingual nature of the country was emphasized more in public policy and art, and although the coin itself doesn't carry French on its face, it circulated in both English and French-speaking households and businesses from Newfoundland to British Columbia. From a collector's standpoint, the 1970 Canada 1 cent coin is particularly interesting for a few reasons. While not especially rare in circulated condition, it becomes valuable when found in uncirculated or mint state condition, especially with red or red-brown surfaces. Coins graded by services like IX or PCGs with high mint state ratings like MIS 65 or higher can command higher prices in the market. Certain examples may even feature minor errors such as die cracks, off-center strikes, or planchet flaws, which makes them even more sought after by error coin collectors. Another aspect worth exploring is how this coin fits into the broader evolution of Canadian coinage through the decades. The 1970 penny sat right between the classic era and the transition toward modern coin production. It was minted before the major material composition changes of the 1980s and before the Royal Canadian Mint introduced laser engraving and other precision technologies. It was also part of the last full decade before Canada stopped producing the penny altogether in 2012, making coins like the 1970 cent a nostalgic artifact of a bygone financial era. Beyond the coin's numismatic value, there's the personal and cultural significance. Countless Canadians remember using these pennies as children, saving them in jars for candy or bubblegum, flipping them in games, or watching their parents count them for grocery payments. These coins were witnesses to everyday life and economic transactions that stitched together the fabric of Canadian society. And so, in this video, we will explore the deeper layers of this coin story. We'll look at how its design reflects Canadian identity, how minting techniques evolved around it, how collectors can evaluate its value today, and what makes certain versions stand out in the coin collecting community. We'll also look into how international events and Canadian policy decisions influenced the need for copper coinage at the time, and how public sentiment around the value of small coins evolved throughout the 70s and beyond. From production costs to inflation to metal content pricing, the fate of coins like the 1970 penny was shaped by more than just minting schedules. It was shaped by how the world was changing and how governments responded to those changes. So stay with us as we unpack all of this and more right here on LC Coins World. Because the value of a coin goes far beyond its face value. It is history, it's memory, and it's a story waiting to be told.